Okay, welcome back everybody to the Think Education podcast. Chris Hill, joined as ever by Judith Lammy. And today we're partly talking about the past, right? In the sense that Judith recently attended the UUKi's TNE event, but we're also talking about the future, right? In terms of what we might be seeing, what we might not be seeing. Are of course foolproof predictions as to what
Yes,
what's
yeah.
happening.
People will be keeping up with those, writing them down and going, they said that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a pretty good track record, right? Months ago we were talking about joint UK partnership institution, and look, that we willed it into being. Yes. So you were fortunate enough to attend an event I would very much have liked to have attended myself, and hopefully I will be able to in the future. So you were in, I mean, what capacity were you there? Were you chairing, speaking, listening?
No, I was attending this one, so this was the Transnational Education Conference that UUKi Universities UKi, or the international unit, as we used to call it, runs every year, and it's. I think also what's been great actually to see with this event, it's a fabulously well attended event. It's always a well attended event, but this year in particular, a lot of people there. It's at Senate House, UCL. So a great location as well. Albeit they need to get their audio sorted out, but that's a different matter. But it's really grown and developed over the years. And the nice thing about it these days as well is that it's like a day and a half. The main day is day 2, and that's when anybody can attend that's involved in transnational education, from governments and agencies to universities to public to private, all different sorts of people, all different walks of life, companies, students, etc. But what they've started to do, and they did it one year and this worked so well, they're continuing to do it now and it works really well, is the day before they have a half day sort of members only day. So we do have to be slightly careful, us, Chris, we're always careful about what we say on our podcast. Not. But the half day before is a members only, Chatham House rules, where we sort of really get under the skin of particular issues, challenges, good things, not so good things, things that are just things, neither good nor bad.
Things that are just things, yes.
Things are just things that you just sort of got to deal with. And we were talking, so I'll start there, just to touch upon some of those points, because these were actually points that were raised in a previous book that we've done, and the wonderful Rachel Sandy wrote about it. But so that and then before I get on to maybe just giving a brief overview of what happened the main day of the conference, which I chaired the whole thing a couple of years ago, which was superb. The event, I have to say, not me chairing it. Sorry, that sounded a smidge arrogant. A great opportunity to do that, let's say. So there were a couple of sessions the afternoon before, one of which was looking at comms strategies when it comes to TNE, so you've got these big events going on, you're opening up a campus here, or you've got these partnerships there, and how do you manage and how do you sort of structure communications around this? How do you deal with internal communications, be they, positive things or more challenging things, and how do you deal with them externally? How maybe do you react to some of the situations that might happen, be it in the press or in other places, and how might you build just a comm strategy that will help you take things forward, with a view to what might what might happen in terms of communications is you're taking big events forward more than anything. I mean, not little partnerships here, there, and everywhere. So more of your big, chunky things like you might be opening up a campus in Kazakhstan, or you might be opening up a campus in India, as seems to be the flavour at the moment. And that was really great. Just touch upon that one to begin with. So there was some really good insights from colleagues at Nottingham, at Cardiff, at Liverpool, and at Lancaster, and some of the the real positives and how you might go ahead with doing that. Some of the challenges they'd had and how that's helped shape strategies for the future. So as I say, I'm not going to go into details about what was said and what was shared, but it was just I think a reflection from that bit is, do we always think about those areas when we are looking at planning for taking things forward, and probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a little bit reactive when it comes to some of these things. So as with a lot of things, making sure you've got people around the table that deal with lots of different areas, whatever you're going to take forward, whenever you're going to do a campus or a big development overseas, involve as many people as possible in the discussion stage across your institution. And because they're experts in their areas, and they'll know what they can suggest and how you can learn from these things. So that was one session, and as I say, very good. Probably the takeaway from that being, think of this beforehand, get your comms strategy sorted out, really just have it at the forefront of your mind, so that when something does happen, positive as well as negative, then you're ready for it. And you can communicate, and you've got the various types of communications that you need to be communicating to different audiences, some of which may be expert audiences that know what you're talking about, and others may have not a clue in the world. So you have to talk about things differently, guys. It's a bit like teaching. You have to gauge what you're doing depending on the audience. So that, I think, was a takeaway there. The other session that we have, which might not sound like it would be the session where you would beat down the door to go to this, it was, drum roll, about tax, and it was about tax management in sustainable TNE. Now, although it might not sound like the most exciting thing in the world, although it has to be said, it was a cracking panel. And if you had to get caught in a lift with any of these people and you ended up talking about tax, quite frankly, you'd learn a lot, and you'd have a few giggles at the same time. These people really knew their stuff and they knew how to deliver it. So it was really good. But it was a really important element of the afternoon. And we talked about it for an hour or so, and we probably could have talked about it for the whole day. And we had Andrea Marshall there, who is a tax specialist, and she's from the British University's Finance Directors Group, BUFDUG, as people call it. And then there were other colleagues there from that, and then we had colleagues from institutions talking about how they've set up things in the past, the kind of questions to ask, the key questions that you might need, checklists that you might need to think about. And again, from this point of view, it's less about maybe going into the detail of tax regimes and VAT and all of these different sorts of things, which quite frankly has always been a puzzle to me, and I'm sure always will be in my personal life as well as my professional life. Of course, it gets manifestly even more complex when you're talking about not only dealing with your own regimes when it comes to tax, etc., but obviously the country that you might be working with. But that again was a really good session, just to one of those things that you really need to think about before you even start to engage with it. You don't have to get everything sorted out right at the beginning, but at least find out if there might be or are likely to be some really big implications for you, particularly when it comes, of course, to your financial model. Now it might be that it won't affect your financial model in terms of, it won't mean that you won't do something, but you just need to be aware about what it is. So involve people as soon as you can. And one thing we did mention, and this isn't meant to be going to be a criticism of any of our wonderful private tax specialists everywhere, because of course they are very good and they do what they do, but also this is an area where universities spend an increasingly large amount of money seeking advice, and they very often seek the very same advice that the university down the road is seeking. So I think there are things that we can do collectively to help this, but also maybe working with the private sector and the private, advice specialists to be giving advice across the piece to institutions and others who are looking to do things overseas. So that was the first day. So I'm doing a bit of speaking at the moment, but I'll stop in the second when we get to the second day, because then we can talk just in a bit more detail and maybe about some of the things that occurred, and maybe have a bit more of a conversation, Chris, about what this might have in terms of implications. But those, I thought, it's just two really good reflections and things to think about, and maybe things for people to come on and talk to us about in the future. If we've got some comms strategy specialists out there to come and talk to us about the kind of things that they do at their institutions and what that might look like, and the same with our tax specialists. It's, again, not the answers to all of the questions, because obviously all places are different, but there might be some common issues that you need to be thinking about, and I think these will help people as they go forward. The main then day was really, again, to talk about where TNE is now, what the place of it is now, and maybe that can be something that that I ask you about, Chris, when I finish, just giving a brief summary of the second day, in terms of where are we at the moment in TNE, and where might it go for the future. This is when we could do with some of our students with us, because they're always absolutely stellar when it comes to any input here, isn't it? But so the second day then, talked about a variety of things, from examples of transnational education across Europe, and the wonderful Eduardo Ramos was there leading a session in the morning on an example of that, to looking at how university networks, different sort of networks, might support TNE developments. Our colleagues and our friends from JISC were there.
Nice.
For the report launch, in terms of their digital, remember their work that they're doing on global education and technology, and the insights into TNE student and staff digital experiences. So they were presenting and discussing that report. And one of the main things that took place was in the morning, and a long session, absolutely filled perfectly, by Griff Ryan, who's the head of TNE, of course, at UUKi International. And this was the launch of the insights work on the scale of TNE. So if you recall, but this happens every year, in the UK. And this, obviously, you're looking at data that you have to look backwards in order to start to look forwards. So you're looking at 23-24 data. It's the 10th anniversary of this report being launched. I remember sitting in a meeting room at Woburn House when this was first talked about, in a much smaller meeting room, has to be said, than the ones that we now inhabit there. And there were discussions around, will this be useful? Won't it be useful? And look at it now. It's wonderful now. And now so you can all go to the website, go to the UUKi website, you can access the report. And not only now can you download a PDF of the report, which you can still do, but it's now wonderfully interactive. So you can get in there and you can look at the detail, and you can look at all of the things that are there, and really start to interrogate it in a lot more detail. And that was something that was fascinating to see, the shape and the scale of TNE going forward. So that's sort of flavour of the event, but it was very well attended, lots and lots of people. And I think my final point, probably on it maybe before coming over to you, Chris, to maybe get some of your reflections on where you see we are at the moment, maybe with TNE, before thinking about the future and looking at this report maybe and what it might lead us to. But what really struck me, and I know I've mentioned this before, but even more so this time, I felt every time it gets more like this, is the amount that people in institutions will share openly and transparently, about their TNE activity, not only about what they're doing, but about what some of the challenges are, so that we can learn from other people. I think we're getting so much better at that, certainly in UK TNE, and I think globally as well. We have people there from many other places too. And that, I think, is when we will all benefit, if we can share things, work together, if we can at the same time, you know, obviously we are competitive with things, but if we can step away from thinking we're only working in a competitive space to knowing that if we can work and share things together, that will be for the benefit of all of us, a little bit like I was mentioning with the tax points, you know, and that seemed to me a really important point. And when people were sharing their reflections on maybe, you know, what a bold new world might look like when you're thinking about, you know, higher education. We had David Pilsbury leading an excellent session on that. Janet Ilieva, just known obviously to the friends here as just Janet, was there too. But you know, there's a lot. You know, people are sharing things and are sharing things very openly, so that we can all learn from some of the challenges and issues that people have had, as well as some of the good things. And I think that was very powerful. So hopefully people will go as well then and have a look at the Scale of TNE report, see what's in there, see the kind of trends that have developed over the years, you know, and the kind of scale and the number of things obviously that are happening within the UK. And it then gives probably people a chance to reflect on what's happening within their own countries and within their own areas, and not only then how they're working with UK institutions that might be within their countries, but obviously in your own areas and how you are developing your own TNE footprints. And probably in where you are, Chris, in Dubai, you know, there's now a lot of institutions looking outward and where they're going with their own TNE footprints. It's certainly not a place just by any stretch of the imagination that is the receiving and setting up of campuses. It is out there itself, isn't it? And I think that in itself is a reflective of what's happening in the environment. So over to you then, Chris, really saying, what's your current view of, you know, the status of TNE at present?
Yeah, I mean, that was really interesting. And I think, you know, a couple of the points that you reflected on, I think are really very encouraging. I mean, the interesting thing I thought about the ComStat report is particularly in terms of how you share successes, right? Because that's, you know, so a lot of what you were saying, I'm thinking back to, you know, all the time I've spent working in and around TNE, and the fact that where we are now is a much healthier collaborative space than it was before. I mean, you know, even, you know, when I began work in Malaysia, you know, you'd go to conferences and it was kind of, you know, British Council would put up one report with a piece of data and you'd be like, wow, there's actually some data we can look at. You know, there was so little around the TNE space that meant that you didn't really understand, even if you're working in it, like you're kind of flying blind a lot of the time. And it wasn't, you know, necessarily, my feeling then wasn't necessarily that it was competitive. It was just kind of isolated in the sense that, you know, we were sort of operating in silos by ourselves, making things up or making mistakes or winning and losing, you know, and it was, therefore we were obviously duplicating a lot of effort. And I think now the fact that it is a lot more transparent, I mean, it's led to more equitable partnerships between sending and receiving countries, which is a very good thing. And indeed now we've seen it's led to collaboration between sending institutions and sending nations, which is, you know, would have been anathema even 5 years ago, let alone 20. So I think that's a really interesting space. And the tax thing is, you know, I've been in several sessions or meetings where somebody has kind of asked a question about tax. And it's always sounded like, well, that's kind of a weird question. Like, what are you asking about that for? And then literally everybody else in the room goes, oh yeah, like, what is that? How does that work? And the common response is, we don't know. Do you have a corporate lawyer? Like, you know, as in, and you start to think, well, you know, there's just these, even as far as we are into the TNE landscape, these just huge gaps in institutional or sector-wide understanding. I think it's, and so the fact that they're being discussed, and the fact that you can have a session on tax that is engaging and great. I mean, that's brilliant. Not really what you'd expect if you saw that on the agenda. You think, oh, I don't know, I better sit through it because it's going to be important. But yeah, so kudos to the presenters. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, in terms of where TNE is going, I mean, I've like you, I've read the the insights report, and some of it's not particularly surprising, in the sense that it kind of conforms to the way we think things are going. The growth is pretty impressive to see that it's the sort of sustained growth, as it were. I'm maybe a little bit surprised that there's not maybe more movement in the postgraduate research numbers than I might have expected. And then as I was reflecting on it, it's like I don't know why I think that, and it's maybe just because I've been in a lot of conversations about the potential of research development, not necessarily conversations about the actual research development. So I thought, that was kind of something I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing to think about. And what I like to see is, the fact that, one of the stats they had is, I think it was over a 70% increase in students registered at overseas partner organizations. And I suppose reflecting on that, you think, well, that, given international recruitment, visa constraints in many of the kind of global receiving nations for international students, like you think, well, that, that kind of makes sense, right? Students are looking for the degrees, but they can't necessarily travel to the place of the degree sort of origin. But then also, I think it was maybe just under 60%, so very high 50s in terms of the students studying with collaborative provision, right? So again, this issue of collaboration that you're bringing up. So I think it's my key takeaways were, this looks like a very healthy, I was going to say snapshot. I don't know why I'm changing the word insight, right? It's a very healthy insight into the reflection, the sector itself, and it looks much more integrated than I think maybe I was conscious of in previous iterations. Sorry, that's not a criticism of the report itself, right? As in the activity that's happening, it seems to be more integrated than, I mean, the report, they're always insightful and of huge value. So I thought that was very interesting. It's always nice to see the Middle East, where I am. We're growing faster than most of the regions, which when you work here is, that's kind of the the impression that you get, and it's nice to have the data to support it.
And how many times, just jumping in there on that point, how many times over the last few years have people probably said, oh, there's no point in now going to the Middle East. Oh, it's saturated. Oh, there's lots, there's not. And that certainly doesn't seem to be the case at all, does it? It doesn't look like it from the outside. It's interesting that the data supports this, and bearing in mind this is data that is a couple of years old.
Yeah.
So I think it will be even more so now, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was interested again by your point that I think the way TNE is developing, I mean, we've used for a while now the notion of a TNE hub, as a somewhere between physical, geographical, however, location of activity. And that typically meant, there were either lots of programs initially or lots of students, and then that sort of became lots of providers, and then that became kind of the Edu City Hub model, where you had kind of a joining together geographically of multiple providers, so that you had like a city of education providers rather than them sort of maybe spread out. But I wonder now if we need a new word, because it's not, I don't know what the transient property of a hub would be. Kind of like the Silk Road, right? In the sense that it's something that it's constantly in flux, because it's not, particularly with the online provision, which, I mean, the report demonstrated that, there's growth in that area as well. With the hybrid, it's TNE is not, it's not fixed anymore, right? We have and it's never, I suppose it was never truly fixed, right? But it had fixed points in the sense that you had a sending nation or sending country, sending institution that located physically either by franchise or joint or IBC in another place. And that became the locus of that education. But now that institution has partnerships in 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 different institutions in different countries. And those institutions in turn have multiple other partnerships. And then they have, they're also now sending and receiving at the same time. And so it's a very interesting area where to claim that any one place is now a TNE hub is probably a bit of a misnomer, because the globe is becoming, just more integrated. And so I find that fascinating, and also, like you, having worked in TNE for a while, we've seen that shift in dependency. Like we've seen the capacity building, we've seen the recognition of different areas and different teaching and research capacities, and therefore a greater sense of sharing of expertise rather than I guess by necessity. And that's, I think, been I was having a conversation with Bola Ibrahim just day before yesterday, who's done a lot of very interesting work on TNE, particularly in Egypt, and looking at, he's looking at exporting of the models and, what that means. And, I think it's very both interesting and very encouraging. Like I'm happy having read the report, which is a very weird thing to say, but it just, it's positive what I can take from this.
It's great. I mean, that I think is probably as well, your point on the hub is probably something for a discussion in the future, where now for the hubs, because as you say, in many ways that term it seems to, it anchors what you're talking about to the location, doesn't it? And it seems that it's a bit like a flight hub, but it's almost like things fly in, and it doesn't have that hub as part of a vibrant network. It's almost seen as a destination, but it's not seen as something that you go through, that you go to somewhere else, that feeds into part of a broader network, is it? And I think it'd be interesting probably to explore that a little bit further, in terms of what are these, as you say, it's almost like what now for these types of hubs, and what terms probably are going to be a little bit more reflective of what it is, rather than it now taking, however, we can't take 20 minutes to explain what it is. And the word hub's only got 3 letters. So
I remember actually attending a British Council Global Education Dialogue in Sri Lanka, I mean, many years ago. And it was at that period where many countries were claiming, I suppose is maybe sounds a little negative, but were seeking recognition for the fact that they were a hub. Right. And in some cases, like Malaysia, for example, had arguably hubs to the north and the south of the country. But then when you looked at the map, you'd say, well, actually, we're now talking really just about Southeast Asia. Like we've got so much activity. And the title of my presentation was "Here a hub, there a hub, everywhere a hub." Which was a very cultural reference, which made me laugh if nobody else. But and it's an interesting, as you say, hub is still the perfect just badge, right? It's easily understood, but actually the spokes are kind of almost more prevalent in terms of what they're doing, rather than the actual fixed location. So I think certainly something to explore and hopefully write about down the line.
Absolutely. And I suppose you could even level that comment. Maybe it's something to do with 3 letters when they're together, but at TNE, couldn't you know? Now we all use it as a shorthand, but we probably all have slightly different ways in which we are interpreting it in our head. I now talk more about TNE plus, because there are things that I personally add within the TNE space that, if you look at the previous definition, reminds me of definitions of internationalization all those years ago, when you go to to Jane Knights and others, it's not that you're disagreeing with what that is, but you're just saying, for me personally, when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about this and these things as well. Do we include articulation agreements? Well, you probably shouldn't if you're looking at the core definition, if you're looking at the QAA. But actually, if you're looking at developing a TNE strategy, maybe that was one thing I was just going to quickly come on to next, what will you include in it?
Yeah.
Do you include those things in it as well?
Yeah.
And if you don't include those things in it, where are you including them?
Exactly.
Where do they sit?
Where do they sit? Yeah.
And that was something maybe I was going to maybe lead us on to next so it's really interesting then therefore what you're saying about, how you feel that this we've almost got the data now to be supporting that notion that we've moved from sort of very isolated, fixed, not only activity, but probably not even strategy. Actually, I think it's safe to say that people didn't even have a strategy, to something that's much more transparent, that's much more equitable, it's much more collaborative. And therefore, then, do you think that in institutions we are moving to trying to articulate this more in our strategies? We've gone, if we look at international and internationalization, and then, and we said though we were using that because we didn't want to use global and globalization because that brought with it a whole different set of connotations in terms of terms. Now people are moving away from internationalization because that makes them think about other things as well. So we sort of flip back to global again because people can't think of anything else. But I suppose if we are having some form of a strategy across universities, just more than anything, I suppose, just to outline, these are broad brush, the kind of things that we're thinking of when we think about this area. This is a definition of the term, and these are the areas we're going to focus on, because otherwise you can't do everything, can't you, in this kind of space. So, I think probably if we think about, maybe a question is, as universities maybe now are looking at the data, are probably talking about TNE a lot more than they were at the most senior level, but also across our entire institutions. I mean, I think this is a challenge for some places at the moment, particularly in the UK, where it's no secret, and I'm sure others are. Well, I know others are suffering with this as well. But there are significant financial challenges because all of your other income streams immediately lose you a significant amount of money because they haven't been costed properly for years and years and years. So people have looked towards international as helping with providing any form of financial sustainability, which of course, given its volatility, is never a good thing anyway. And because of that being volatile, now people are starting to look towards TNE as providing probably less in terms of the diversification and more in terms of some form of stability, which is even more volatile than your onshore recruitment space. But if you are then going to have that, you do need to have some form of a strategy and a focus though for it, don't you? So what do you think then, Chris, in terms of if universities then are looking at this, and we're still having people, I've had people say to me many a time, well, we need a short-term solution to the challenges we've got. Let's do some TNE. And you're like, okay, those two things, that beginning of the sentence and the end of the sentence, do not go together. If you think of, if you're putting short-term and TNE together, this will not happen. It is going to be something in a variety of ways that has to be at least a medium-term, if not a long-term endeavour that you're putting forward. So all of that aside, in terms of, at least maybe it gives you an opportunity to raise that as a point to discuss across your institutions. But if universities are developing their TNE strategies, then what do you think might be some of the recommendations for what they need to be doing as they're bringing a strategy together?
It's a really good question. And it's funny because even with everything I've read and everything everybody I've talked to about, TNE, and, you look at the numbers and what is it, over 170 providers from the UK are engaged in TNE. I mean, it's, it's almost everybody, and, it's almost everywhere. And it's like, I'm still not entirely sure why people do it. Like, and it's, no, that's not true. Everybody does it because everybody does it. So it's a kind of a thing that people do. And as you say, it's been a driving factor as kind of a subsection of internationalization, which has been, exactly as you say, potentially so important to an institution. Well, no, to the countries, right? We're not talking about, micro level here. But actually, when, a lot of the answers you get back are, oh, well, we want to, expand our global reach. Okay, well, what does that mean? To what end? Right. So if you could say, oh, well, actually TNE engagement really supports the national rankings, and therefore that has a net benefit in terms of, institutional, et cetera, but it doesn't, not in the same way that, other factors do, okay, well, TNE is going to bring us in X number of million, whatever currency, but it doesn't. Right? I mean, it might do eventually, right? I mean, but it doesn't, as you say, certainly not in the short term. So what's the reason behind it, right? Is it, is it is it literally widening participation, writ large, and if so, then that's a moral, ethical, value proposition of an institution. And then it's like, well, then there doesn't have to be any notable return. That in itself is the value. But I don't think that that's particularly it. Is it, well, we want to be part of the club and we don't want to be left out of the club? It's like, well, okay, then there's a currency in that, right? That sure has a value. So like I can understand that all these different motivating factors, you can measure them and you can assign value to them. But in terms of, if the bottom line is financial, that's can't and shouldn't be the driving motivation. So if it's reputational, okay. And then I think back to conversation we had with your colleague Ian Abbott. Maybe, I'm not sure, I can't remember when that was. When he's talking about aligning internationalization and research to community engagement and to sort of problem solving, and you think, okay, then you start to see kind of more of that mission of a university and engagement and what that means to collaborate. But again, that how you articulate that back to exec or senate, we're talking very much about soft power rather than we are talking about sort of clear financial returns. And if that's the case, then that's the case, right? It's the brand recognition, it's the reputational indicators. And then I started to think back, like, why on earth am I in this world? Like, I mean, I fell into it backwards and loved it and kept going. And everybody that you talk to, everybody we've talked to on the podcast, they're motivated, they're engaged, and they're really interested in it. And it's almost like we wouldn't do anything else because this kind of really scratches that itch. But I don't think I know how to answer the question. I mean, I've given like 9 non-answers. I suppose if you add them up together, it's half of an answer, maybe.
I suppose the big question there is why, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why are you doing it? You can't really define anything else, any of your terms, any of your focus of areas of activity. You can't do any of that until you decide why you're doing something in the first place. Now, it might be that you're doing something for a variety of reasons.
Of course.
So it could be that you are doing it for reputational benefit. You are doing it to assist in terms of widening participation and giving other people an opportunity to engage with education that they want, that otherwise they might not be able to. And it might be that you're doing it to supplement your financial areas. Any one, you can't almost do any one of those things and just one of those things, because in of itself it won't do enough there.
Exactly.
But it might do enough to do all of them, doesn't it? But then if you're not careful, it ends up being something that is a bit piecemeal. What struck me when you were speaking, to come down to the why part of it, but even almost above that, are you doing TNE because you think you should be doing it, because it is a clear strategy for the university, that you think it's the right thing to do. Like, why have you got undergraduate students? Why have you got postgraduate students? Why have you got PGR students? Why have you got TNE students? Are you doing it for the reason in that you actually, if you're looking at your institutional strategy, the reason for your existence, this is why you're bringing these things on board. Are you doing it for that reason? Or, and it's not quite as binary as having an or, but sort of a little bit, or are you doing it to solve a problem?
Yes.
Are you doing it because you don't have enough students coming to the reason that you don't, and you're seeing that as a problem because they don't have the flow through finance scheme. So are you doing it because financially you've got a challenge at the institution? If the answer there is yes, then you are fundamentally going to have a big problem. If you're seeing this as solving your finance. But I think that's partly it. Are you doing it to solve a problem, or are you doing it to drive a clear institutional strategy, plan, and ambition? And that might be an interesting
because if it's
spectrum on which to look at it.
Because if it's the latter, right, if it's driving part of your strategic ambition, how you measure success can be in the act of having done it.
Yes.
Right, rather than the absolute return, it's the act of saying, I mean, we wrote this, when we did the typology of partnerships and networks, right? It could be, no, a measure of success is that we are in that club, that we have done that we can be, we can put that on our promotional material. That is part of our identity, that we do these types of things. In which case, then that's a very valid measure of success. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, when you look back sort of however many 10, 20 years ago, a lot of TNE was driven by the receiving nation, the need for educational provision, right? It was a, and therefore the senders were simply responding to that, and were very much in control, and were able to dictate terms largely. I mean, not within the regulatory framework, but they had a certain measure of power, sort of resting on the reputation of their nation, necessarily even more so than maybe the institution. But it was driven by need. And almost what's interesting now is to say, if we can say, that the traditional receiving nations are no longer in the position of need. And actually, as you said, some of them are even exporting. And even if they're not exporting, they're very much dictating, no, we need these programs in these 3 particular strategic areas. And if you don't have them, then move along down the line, please. Whereas the typical sending nations are now operating from a position of need.
Yes.
Which that's an interesting kind of, I mean, I know it's a very general term, but it's an interesting kind of flip in the way. And yes, if you're entering into TNE because you need it to solve your institutional problems in terms of finance or recruitment, this is not the way. No. That's when you start to think about, well, actually, maybe are we talking about merging different institutions together to streamline and actually, pull, et cetera, which again, that's a difficult conversation for many institutions to have. Man, this has turned into a really interesting conversation.
And maybe, and I know we're probably going to have to start to wrap up now, but maybe thinking of an example of what we've got in terms of TNE activities at present that's certainly, very popular in the UK in terms of discussions, is India. A lot of people are looking at India because other people are looking at India, and they feel as though they should look at India. And do they have a strategy for it? No. Is it part of a broader? No. But so there are lots and lots of different reasons there, as to why they might be doing it. But I think also, however, one of the options for a collaboration there, or if you do want to have a campus there, you might want to just set up your own. Of course, you might want to collaborate with one of your other partners somewhere else and then go and set up something together. Or you might be talking to an institution there and saying, you know what, we're quite keen to come here set up this campus, and the NEP have said that it's really, this is what we want to, and there's a need and a draw from the government, and the states are all saying, yes, actually we would welcome this is what we want. So it's not people going and trying to deliver something that isn't needed or wanted. It is something where there's been a call for it, so please can you come and think about this. I don't think we would have had those conversations so much in places before, where you're actually looking at comparable institutions or maybe different institutions, but you're all bringing something to the table, and you're looking at that kind of collaboration that you might have not done previously, but you're looking at that sort of actively now. And that, I think that is a really interesting point that you make, in terms of that the need, therefore the need and the strategy and the ambition have almost flipped in terms of where that first originated. So was the strategy and the ambition possibly traditionally in the sending areas, and was the need possibly going to be in the area where the establishment was set up? And now has it flipped? Those areas have got very, very clear ambitions, strategies as to what they want to do and where they want to go, and the need for it, for those traditional sending places, has become a lot higher. So institutions need to do it. It isn't a luxury. It isn't something that they think, oh, we'll have a bit of this. They actually need to do it to survive as an institution, and that's a very different balance of power. And we talked about this a little bit when we talked to Jazreel, didn't we? There as well, in terms of that shift of the balance of power, and maybe there's that shift of that need and what that looks like, how then that informs what happens internationally, but how that then fundamentally informs what you're doing with regard to the development of your strategy. And if you've got a need and you're doing something for that reason, you've got to be, going back to the points that you made earlier, you've got to be open, you've got to be transparent, and you've got to be collaborative about it, because people will know why you're doing something. It will be really clear. Don't pretend that you're doing it for any other reason. Make it really clear. Or I don't mean reason singular. Don't say that you're just doing it for this. Be really clear that you are doing it for that reason as well. And actually then maybe you will get that. So if you are doing something for the financial benefit, make sure that, and you're doing it with a partner, make sure that your partner knows that. Because you know what? They might be able to help you a heck of a sight more than they would otherwise if you're not open and transparent about that. And maybe that will be the direction that we go in slightly more. But coming all the way back to why we started this conversation in the first place, if we can try and remember that. But it was about the conference, and it was about all of these things. I think the kind of data that we've got now, the information that we've got, really helps us to have these kind of conversations that we need to have, but are difficult conversations, as indeed the question why is always a very difficult one, and tends to be one that people don't and can't answer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Wow, I'm happy with this conversation too.
So we've sorted that out again, and we can blame all of this conversation on UUKi and their teams, and on Griff and Jamie and Annabelle and Donna and Alex,
for creating
the teams for creating this discussion that we've had because of that conference and because of the launch of what is arguably one of the best pieces of work we have all year in terms of the scale of TNE report.
Damn their thought-provoking, data-driven analysis.
Yes.
We just don't need it in our sector. It's
we don't need this kind of conversation in our sector, guys, do we?
Yeah, and on that note, thank you very much. Okay.